Welcome to latest podcast in the series of leadership and culture in healthcare. My name's Matthew Winn, and I am delighted that I have Mairead McCormick, who is with us this week from Kent. Mairead, you explain your organisation, and maybe for those that don't know you, a little bit about you and what you do in the trust and how you ended up as leading Kent community as well.
Good morning, Matthew. Lovely to talk to you. I am the Chief Exec of Kent Community Health NHS Foundation Trust and have been for just over the last 18 months. And how I ended up there. So I've been in the NHS for 34 years now, so quite a long time. Started my career as a nurse, and I was an emergency nurse for many, many years. And then I went into management stroke leadership. About 25 years into that, I moved from sort of clinical management into much more operational roles. I spent some time with the National Improvement Team, actually ESIS. So big focus on emergency care for the first half of my career. And then I was then subsequently a Chief Operating Officer and then a Deputy Chief Executive at Kingston Hospital prior to this role. So most of my career actually has been in the acute sector or indeed in systems around emergency care. And how I ended up in Kent community is, number one, I'm a Kent resident, so I'm obviously very passionate about making care good for the people of Kent and Medway. And then I guess the community, I've always really had an interest in how far upstream can we get to stop a sort of a reactive, responsive model, an ill health model. So really, really interested in that sort of preventative, anticipatory side of care, which community can do so exceptionally well with, with primary care and partners. So I really developed that interest probably when I started looking at whole systems and how they work together, particularly when I was doing the urgent emergency care work. So I've been with Kent Community for just over 18 months. Sometimes I still feel like a bit of a newbie, but I'm getting there.
So 18 months in, you would have done lots of things, but you will have inherited lots of ways of working, the culture of the organisation. And one of the reasons we're talking to you is because the trust staff survey results, and we're using 22-23, had you top or joint top in 3 out of the themes nationally. How do you describe the culture and the approach in the organisation that you lead, Mairead?
Yeah, so look, I have to say, first of all, Matthew, I was in a fortunate position in taking over a really stable organization with a lot of really good and solid foundations already there. So I most certainly wouldn't be taking the credit for creating a new culture. So there was lots of pockets of good and, things to build on. But I guess the thing for me that really stood out was when you really think about, what matters to staff. There were certain sort of early observations that we've overcomplicated things for staff, and the layers and layers of sort of rules and processes to get through to make things easier, which almost sort of was counterintuitive, and this was born of what felt like, a culture that was very safety focused, which is great, but it almost gone too far. Seeking sort of an element of perfection, and because I've got a huge interest in, continuous improvement, there is an element of trying to shape when it is good enough that you've got to sort of run with that. And I think the layers and layers of bureaucracy really to get things done was really evident straight away. And if anything, it was disabling people rather than enabling them. So that was one thing that really stood out. I guess the other thing was following up on things that people were reporting. So the responsiveness, for example, in the staff survey, I think people will only be responsive if they see action on the back of it, and it's meaningful and purposeful, and then it translates into, and this is making my working life a bit easier or a bit better. So that meaningful listening stuff that is quite critical, and we can all say, "Oh, yes, I listen," but actually really listening and being heard, and then following up on that, and then making sure that there is something happens on the back of that. It's really important to people because people watch for that. And I guess that then builds the trust and confidence, doesn't it? That you're going to take things seriously.
Mm. And that's interesting because it's a two-way element, isn't it? The more you feed back, the more people will say, okay, well, this is the issue as well. So what have you actually practically done to change that? Because that's quite a big cultural, these are not kind of easy kind of levers that you can pull. It's a cultural change issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and there's many, many ways I think you have to do it, Matthew. There's no sort of one size fits all. So initially, I was trying the engagement sessions with the staff, offering many sort of virtual sessions. But on top of that, of course, I think the visibility piece is so critical. What amazed me was getting visibility right in community. It's entirely different than getting it right in an acute trust, because I used to be able to just pop over and visit the wards and the A&E department and the corporate services. Of course, in Kent community, for me to get to one of my further sites is a 2.5 hour drive, so it's not as easy. So I recognise the logistics part, and locking that time down in the diary on a weekly basis to make sure that it is it's quite focused and it covers off all the avenues, and that we've got a plan in place that everybody is seen throughout the year on a regular basis. And then the other thing, I suppose, is about that face to face. The thing that really strikes me is I'm really, and I've got sort of memories of this in the past as a clinician, where executive teams used to come and do a royal visit, and you'd think, well, what was the purpose of that? So for me, I think getting that part right about what does the visit need to look like, what is the meaningful conversation that we can have. And there's a bit of me that thinks also just spending time watching and learning. Interestingly, I've just updated my mandatory training to practice. I'll practice as a HCA, but I think sometimes just blending in with the teams and experiencing what good team, what camaraderie looks like for that team. And the more you blend in, the more you notice from a staff member's perspective. I guess the other thing is we've done a mass amount on our Nobody Left Behind piece of work, which is really just been a mass listening exercise. It's taken quite a long time to do. There are many different ways we listen through the staff networks, various different forums. But the thing that we're doing most recently is pulling all of these strands together under a staff voice forum led by our staff governors. And for me, this is a really exciting piece of work because it is pulling all of it together. It's looking at the trends. It's looking at what we're hearing and seeing, and then most importantly, are we shifting the dial? Is what we are doing in terms of addressing the things that are coming up actually meaningful, and shifting the dial? And I like it that the staff governors are leading that forum. It's a new way of doing this, but I was just aware of so many strands of loops of feedback, and how we pull that together sort of in a cohesive story, and not try to boil the ocean, and focus on maybe the 2 or 3 big things that are at the top of that list that we need to sort.
And how does that, Mary, then manifest? So if you've got listening events, you've No One Left Behind initiative, and you've got your I think I heard you talk about a staff forum. How does that then translate in Kent community into then being the reality for all your staff? Because it's that kind of quandary, isn't it? We can talk about all these things with the most enthusiastic people, the most engaged staff group, but actually, it's interesting that you've called it "No One Left Behind." It is that healthcare assistant that's working in a community nursing team or in a standalone small rehab unit that you want to not leave behind and then have engaged in that process. So how do you make that happen, and how do you make those connections from saying we want to do 2 or 3 things, and then how does that kind of manifest?
So I think there's hard metrics for measuring this, isn't there, Matthew? Like your turnover. So I absolutely believe that our turnover is significantly reduced because of the investment in this time. So there's this sort of the hard workforce metrics and your retention. But looking at the more practical things. So for example, staff are telling me they're spending endless hours, wasting hours trying to get information into systems. It's a real bugbear for people and it's really disabling in your job. So we need quantifying that and then measuring it sort of through a continuous improvement piece of work. That's a sort of example that I would give. And then you sort of tangibly see most recent example that we saved 41 minutes per member of staff per day on making this improvement. Now it can take several weeks and indeed sometimes months to make these improvements, but keeping the focus there and co-designing it with the very people that are experiencing it. And it's easy to say co-design, but it's the principles of any good improvement work, doing it together, really calling out what the problem is, focused pieces of work, and then softer measurement as well as the hard metrics. So how does it feel? How did it make you feel? Does it feel any better as much as, did it save time or did it do what we said it was going to do? Um, and we get a lot of that through the continuous improvement work. And of course, triangulating that through the conversations that you're having. And we're very fortunate in that staff do tell you exactly how it feels. There's no covering it up. They'll absolutely tell you warts and all what's going on, which is refreshing for me and where I want it to be. You mentioned the people, Matthew, that are sort of maybe harder to reach or work in environments that they're not sitting in front of a computer and they can't see the trail of communications. So it's been very deliberate in seeking out who and where they are. Where are the environments that they might be that they may not be accessing this? And then asking them, what is the best way to communicate with you? How could we do this in a meaningful way? Because I guess we're all very good at rushing to solutions, but actually asking the people who are harder to reach in those circumstances. And that was all part of the Nobody Left Behind work is, how do we hear you? And then how do we engage back with you? How do we communicate with you in the environment that you work in?
And when I look at the results that your staff have posted on the Star Survey, I mean, certainly last year, so year before last, you were kind of headlining joint top nationally on we're a team, we have a voice that counts, we are compassionate, inclusive. So 2 of those areas, voice that counts and a team, clearly go back to if you're listening to people, making changes to what's going on. It's not surprising that people actually feel very engaged. That other area, though, we are compassionate and inclusive, is a lot about, I guess, in my experience, about how your leaders operate. So what's been going on in the organization over the years to kind of get those type of results been really great from a staff perspective?
Yeah, I always think it's interesting that, I think people believe that, you join healthcare to be compassionate because you're a naturally compassionate person, but that doesn't always play out in the reality. Um, or indeed, people translate compassionate as, being soft or, yeah, or being kind is always something that's got to be there. But of course, the being kind comes twofold. Sometimes that is just, you know, enabling people to have a really difficult conversation. And my experience is that people really appreciate a difficult conversation early on that helps really focus on, what it is that needs to be um, addressed, supported. It's not a soft landing, and it's not a soft way of doing things. People get into maybe the misunderstanding that, somehow we're going to lose a focus on performance if we become compassionate and associated with a soft and fluffy. I think quite the opposite. I think that compassionate is much wider than that. It's paying attention to getting it right for everyone. I think it's a contract between people. So if I'm showing compassion, I expect it in return, and I think that sort of role modeling as leaders. And one thing I think is really interesting, Matthew, is the attention and focus that we pay to relationships. So I place huge emphasis on forming relationships and the time that I give to relationships. So, for example, I give an extraordinary amount of time to relationships at a partnership level, wider than beyond the trust. And I think through that investment, I've seen people appreciating that time is time well spent, because when those relationships are right, and you have good, honest conversations and you build trust, you see the natural fallout through the many, many conversations then happen at various levels throughout, through with our teams, with partner teams as well. And I think the inclusive part for me is, what really understanding what it means to individuals. So I start with my exec team. What really helps you feel included in the team? And it's different for every one of them. It's really different. And it always intrigues me how different it can be. But it's paying attention to that, giving people proper time and one-to-ones, really listening to how they're feeling at that time. And again, how does it feel, as much as, what's doing, what actions are you achieving, what objectives are you achieving? Um, play. You talked about the sort of the team thing. And the one thing that really sort of resonates for me is my whole career, I've worked as a team. My emergency care days, we could only succeed by working as a team. But really understanding those component parts of those teams was always quite critical. So if you like, it's almost on a bigger level, is what are all the component parts that make this team? What's my role within that? And then how do I fit in? What's my contribution to this? And most of the time, when I ask staff, the thing that makes them get out of bed and come to work, they'll say it's the team. And I don't create that, but I create that within my own sort of executive team. And then I guess it's a role modeling, isn't it? Is if my team feel included, happy, and compassionate at work, then that's the role modeling playing out right there.
Yeah. And you mentioned at the top that, you've been miraculously, I can't quite believe it, 35 years in the NHS. What's different about Kent Community than, I don't want you to do direct comparisons with other past employers, but you see other organizations around. What would you kind of home down to say these are the things that we do really well that actually do manifest in good staff survey results and good outcomes?
Yeah, one of the things that I feel is worth paying huge attention to is that if we accept upfront that to improve, we are going to get some things wrong, to try new things, to innovate, accepting that and actually saying it sometimes really helps. And I think we do a lot of that. Certainly most recently in our improvement work, and really trying to embed that culture of, I mentioned it at the beginning, you might just not, it won't be perfect. It might have to be good enough, but let's run with it, because we've got all the evidence that it's the right way forward. So let's run with that and feel safe to do it. Because only time in my own career where I haven't enjoyed work is where I've felt squashed or disabled from doing that improvement work, or indeed afraid of failure. And I'd never really experienced that before, but it really stands out as a time of unhappiness. And I safely say, Matthew, it's probably the only time in my career, and that's quite something, 35 years. And I think people sometimes don't believe you when you say, I've had an absolute fantastic, happy career for 35 years. There's been pockets where I have not felt entirely happy. And I directly link that back to not feeling safe, or people reacting in a really negative way if you get something wrong, rather than through a supportive lens of, let's look at the learning, what happened. Because the reality is, you and I know that, things do go wrong, or indeed it's not perfection. So big focus on that. Let's run with it. If it's good enough, it's worth trying. Obviously, keeping it as safe as possible, but feeling safe to try it, I think, is the thing at the heart of it for me.
Mm. And you mentioned working with other organizations. Our jobs as leaders is to create those ingredients, create that atmosphere where people can take risks. And I think, you said one of the things that attracts you to working in a community organization is the ability to make some of those things change. I think at the heart of that is taking different thresholds of risk and saying we need to do things differently. And I guess what I'm hearing is you're setting the cultural background for staff to say it's not just them, it's us, and the organization will back them if actually everything doesn't go right all the time.
Yeah, it's and I've heard loud and clear from our staff, and I love it when I hear it, because there is a tremendous ability to carry a huge amount of risk in community services, as you know. And staff are always saying, I could do more if I had this, or there's another way of doing this. Do you think we could try this? And they're never looking to take less risk, actually, because I think at the heart of it is a real drive to keep people at home in the environment where we know it's, usually the best place to be for our local population. But I think feeling safe to do that, and a real move away from anything that is remotely punitive, or I guess just knowing that we've got their back, and we're doing it together. There's that togetherness. We are improving this together. This is not your improvement program; it's our improvement program, and we know up front some of these things might go wrong, but collectively we'll learn from it.
And as you've moved from being deputy chief exec at Kingston and, as you said, chief operating officer and all that other roles, and now you're a year and a half into leading Kent, what would you identify as your personal impact on the organisation? It's interesting that you looked at your face there, because no chief exec likes talking. Well, no chief execs I've talked to on this series wants to talk about them and what they do in their organisation. So let me kind of home you down. What would the staff say this is your impact on the organisation since you've been there?
I would hope that they would say that I am a relational leader. I place a lot of emphasis on getting relationships right. I place a huge emphasis on what does it take to build trust. Um, you know, do the staff know me? Have I given enough time for them to get to know me? I've certainly put a lot of, physical hours into it. But the test for that for me is that we can have good conversations. One of my measures of success, actually, Matthew, is my telephone number is, published on our intranet. And I've had staff just pick up the phone and ring me about something, and that's from all levels. And it's not that they're bypassing their normal sort of mechanism for feedback, because actually most times they're not. but they'll just pick up the phone and say, I thought you'd like to know this, or I wanted to share this with you. And that to me is we're in the right level of a relationship, that they feel that they can have a conversation. The hierarchy is not there. And there is an openness to share something with me, both positive and negative. So it's a two-way process. So I think that, and probably I would say that they know I am certainly not afraid to show vulnerability either. And I will absolutely, I will own it if if I've got it wrong, or I think could have done better. And again, I think that's brilliant for trust, because it helps people then recognize in themselves, well, if I get it wrong, it's actually okay to say, yeah, this hasn't quite worked out. But also,
How has that happened recently then? Because that's not always, this perception of a chief exec to be, I know what I'm doing, I'm going to be doing this, and I'm lead from the front, etc. You've just said something completely the opposite, which is, tell everybody when you got it wrong or it's not going right. How's
yeah.
that happen? How have you done that though it doesn't erode confidence?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fine balance. But my experience you know, in life, in NHS in general, is people like to absolutely believe and know who you are and your authentic self. And there is something quite doubtful about somebody who's always saying, I know exactly what I'm doing and I know I've got it on track. I don't believe it when people say it, so I don't expect staff to believe it. Um, so something most recently was, we embarked on an improvement journey, and we developed our true north, and we developed our objectives, and our sort of breakthrough objectives. And I think we probably were over ambitious in what we thought we could achieve. Um, and there's lots of really important stuff in there. And to be fair, it was designed with the staff, but rather than just stick to 2 or 3 things, we probably put more in there, being over ambitious. And of course, we haven't achieved them all, and we've achieved a percentage of it. But I think saying that you know finding the balance between being really ambitious. So we've been really ambitious. We didn't achieve them all, but that's okay. You know, we failed to deliver on all of these, but you know what, guys? We got 70% of them. That's fantastic. But I think always keeping that level of ambition there. But knowing and saying when you haven't achieved it, because people see it and they feel it. But not saying it through a lens of disappointment, just recognizing actually that, keeping the ambitions high is important, but we won't always achieve 100%.
And that's okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Mairead, when you think about you as a leader, then you've talked a lot about how you operate that relational element, building trust, being visible, accessible, building your team, and you've been quite specific about performance, and some of this stuff is hard-nosed and it's not fluffy. How have you been informed? How have you grown to be that type of leader? What's informed you to be able to operate like that in what sounds like a pretty intelligent and intuitive way?
I think probably twofold, Matthew, is fortunate in the people that I've met in my career. So the leaders that I've worked with that have inspired me to to behave in a certain way. So I really watch behaviors, and I know the behaviors that that I like, and I that resonates with me and your own personal values. So understanding what those behaviors are, and then the impact, and of course I've seen it firsthand for many years. So clearly, learning from others and being, again, those conversations, those early conversations that people had with me in my early days, and honest, good conversations that really helped me grow and learn. Replicating that and sort of playing that back now is really, really important. And I guess the second part of that is it never stops. You never stop developing, and you never stop learning and asking the questions. Have I got this right? Have I got the balance right? Is this meaningful? Is this purposeful? Constantly seeking feedback in whichever form that might be. So that might be when you're out and about with staff. Can you tell me a little bit about how that feels? Or we've just had this conversation. Did that resonate? Starting on that sort of granular level with people face to face on the shop floor, and then right up to what you're doing with your board in terms of your board effectiveness. Are we having the right conversations? Have we got the right level of challenge? How does that make us feel? How do we get this right? What's our risk appetite? And I think that's really important to get that right at the board, which we continue to do a lot of work on, and knowing that it never stops, because sometimes when people change and move, that dynamic can shift or it can become less effective. So keeping a constant watch on that, and asking the questions of ourselves, constantly holding that mirror up to self.
And what helps you then personally to sustain operating like that? Because that's a really inquisitive nature, isn't it? Asking, seeking, understanding from people, challenging, checking out. That's a lot of energy
It
going out
is.
all the time. So what
Yeah.
sustains you as a leader?
Yeah. So I guess I'm always naturally curious, and I always have been. So that will stay with me, for a lifetime, hopefully. And I find curiosity gives me energy. So those things for me are directly linked. Um, what gives me that personal resilience? So I think you've got to find what is your own work-life balance. What's the things that refuels you when you're not in the work environment? And I'm very protective of time with family, because that for me is one of the things that gives me balance, and how much time I put into that. I'm quite into lots of outdoorish things. So I cycle a lot, walking in the countryside, real connection with nature, anything outdoors at all. I'll give anything a go. Paddleboarding, something that's out there in nature will always refuel me. Which is, winter months are often a bit tougher to do that. And then engaging with the people that that you have those rich conversations with, whether that be good friends, family, um, those are the things. And even sometimes I do talk about work outside of work, but because I'm always interested, I'm always curious, I'm always reading things. But that doesn't feel like work.
Yeah, it's filling you up for the next opportunity, isn't it?
It is.
Absolutely.
It
And
is.
when you just bringing this great conversation to a close, I'm afraid, when you think about other leaders, and the press on the NHS is dreadful. We had the attitude survey published last week, which wasn't great reading, of people's kind of trust and confidence in what we deliver, etc. What do you say to future NHS leaders and leaders coming through to say why they should do it based on your experience? Because earlier you said you've loved nearly everything about your last 35 years.
Yeah, I guess for me, Matthew, is anything that we do that involves either directly giving care or indirectly giving care has the absolute ability to give you a tremendous sense of fulfillment. And I absolutely believe that the majority of people that have joined the NHS, if not all, have joined with that belief. And it's a huge privilege to do it. And when you get it right and set the conditions for that there is nothing like it. It is the most incredible experience, and having spent a lifetime either directly giving care or indirectly, that still exists. That opportunity still exists. I think for us, the things that I would say to future leaders is there's a huge opportunity to set those conditions for the future. Um, and rather than take a back seat, sit in the driving seat and inform it, because if you've grown up in that world, you're in a great position to inform what are the real conditions that are going to continue to let us have this enriched experience from giving care.
Finally, when you think you've done 18 months at Kent, what do you look forward to in the next 18 months? What do you sit in there? We've got all this nonsense going around us. It's sometimes really frustrating, but what do you home down and think, I'm really looking forward to sorting that out?
So I'm really looking forward to the size of the opportunity that we have with our partners in primary care and social care and voluntary sector in delivering much more sustainable care for people in their own homes. And that I'm loving the work in the health and care partnerships at a place-based level, because I really do believe that what we do at place is going to be so life-changing for the future. So I'm really excited about working at a neighbourhood level and at a place-based level with partners beyond health to get it to address all of those things that we know that makes for healthy lifestyles. And I see so much opportunity there, and it really, really motivates me to continue to do this.
No doubt, when I think and kind of reflect on what you've been talking about, that change is only going to happen if your local leaders trust each other. You have those relationships where you've actually forged a common purpose, which is lots of what you've talked about in your organization. And it's been fascinating to listen to someone that, Kent, as you said, was doing really well. Kent Community was doing really well before you joined them. You've then looked at improving how those things have happened, challenging, perhaps an over onerous safety culture and layers of rules and elements, improving how you do change using metrics. But, flying through from everything you said, Mairead, was the compassionate inclusivity of what you do with a team, how to be a great relational leader, build the trust, be accessible, authentic, and let people know when things are hard and when things have gone wrong, and actually learn from it and move forward to do the next thing. Those are all fabulous lessons for any leader to mirror and do all the time. Thank you for sharing the information about you on this podcast, Leadership and Culture in Healthcare, and some insights into Kent Community Foundation Trust.
Thanks, Matthew. Enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.